All about it. Extra, extra, read all about it. I'm Pastor Bruce Wall, live in the studio today, preparing for a day of broadcasting and a day of speaking the truth with love. Again, this is Boston, a special segment of the Boston Black News broadcast. We're interrupting our diabetes broadcast to bring you information for our nation regarding the arraignment of Donald Trump today, which is the number one news story in our country, if not all over the world. We do not actually have the exact time, or I do not have the exact time for his arraignment, but our goal is to actually cover it live and bring it to you so that you can see it and analyze it and listen to different people talk about it throughout the day. This is going to be something a little bit different for Boston Black News to cover one of these stories as they are happening, but we're going to do it. Again, we're interrupting our African American diabetes program to bring you this information regarding Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, and I'm hoping, because this is going to be a very, very historic day in our country, and I'm going to say a very historic day all over the world. And it's my understanding that Donald Trump is actually in New York City. He came in on yesterday, flew in on his own jet, and he's going to face a court. He's going to hear the charges against him, and then he will respond. After he goes back to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, he'll respond to what just happened to him on today. Let's see if we can bring up some information here for you to listen
at
to.
New York City court.
We want to bring in now CBS News national correspondent and our fellow co-anchor of the midday, Errol Barnett. He is there outside of LaGuardia as we are seeing the former president's plane land right now. Errol, tell us, officially on the ground in New York in about 5 seconds, what is the situation like there at LaGuardia? What are the security concerns? What are you seeing and hearing?
Lana and Lilia, this is a significant moment as we watch President Trump's private aircraft as a private citizen, what his team had described as Trump Force One leading up to his time in the presidency, landing and returning back here in New York as Donald Trump faces justice. The security situation here at LaGuardia is a strengthened posture from the Port Authority police. Secret Service agents and their vehicles are already on the tarmac waiting for this aircraft to arrive at the private terminal. And from here, Donald Trump will then transit for about 30 minutes to his old former home at Trump Tower, the place he famously in 2016 or in 2015 announced his campaign for the nomination, and ultimately which made him win the nomination and won the White House. This is the moment. This is the moment Donald Trump returns to New York to face what he says is a witch hunt against him. But we've watched, as his campaign says, they've already made $4 million since the indictment. So it's both a legal threat, but a money-making opportunity for the former president as he now lands in his former home of Queens.
Right now, 3:27 p.m. is when the plane has made landing. Errol, you have been there near LaGuardia for several hours today. What can you tell us about security measures? We know that NYPD officers were all told to be ready for deployment in uniform. This started last week. We know that there's coordination with the Secret Service, but what does it look like there on the ground? How's security and how are those preps for the tour? I mean, for the travel between there and Trump Tower ahead this afternoon?
That's right. Well, I'll give you a kind of the lay of the land a bit. Here at LaGuardia, I'm at Terminal A, which is its own kind of offshoot from the rest of the airport. So there isn't a ton of airport traffic where I am. In fact, that plane is so close to where I'm standing, I can hear those engines just in the distance. So the president taxiing not too far from where I'm standing. Mayor Eric Adams here in New York said earlier, and you broadcasted it live on the stream, that there would be rolling road closures during Donald Trump's time here. Remember, he's just landing here in the city to face the indictment tomorrow, see the charges, and then he returns to West Palm Beach. So he really is coming in and then exiting the city, taking every step to minimize disruption and security threats as possible. The city also making it clear there are no specific or direct threats that they're aware of, but they are also aware of the heated political rhetoric in the country. One pro-Trump supporter drove past us not too long ago and shared a number of expletives, as well as his support of President Trump and his dislike of President Biden. The city knows that. They know that there could be some very vocal pro-Trump supporters. And so we don't believe there will be road closures between here at LaGuardia and Trump Tower, but we also don't know which specific route the president will take. The Secret Service has already mapped this out to minimize disruption, but we do expect the president will leave LaGuardia, head onto the BQE, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, and then make it over to Manhattan and Trump Tower. So we understand there'll be limited disruption, but we're all about to watch this unfold in real time right now.
Yeah, and the mayor actually said, try to use public transportation if you can, because even, there's some road closures and there's just going to be a lot of traffic looking ahead at people wanting to either show their support or the opposite of that.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing Mayor Adams say we're not a playground for people to misplace their anger. New York City is homes for many people, but as you say, Errol, it wouldn't be the first time that New Yorkers heard some expletives out on the street. Remind our viewers, however, the real substance behind these charges. We haven't seen the indictment released yet, so we don't know the specifics of any crimes that he's being charged with. But tell us more about the payments to Stormy Daniels and what what's behind that in terms of potentially some criminal misconduct.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question because there are so many legal threats the president faces. It might be first important to say what this is not. This has nothing to do with January 6th and the insurrection at the Capitol. This has nothing to do with potential election interference in Georgia as it relates to the president asking for additional votes. And this has nothing to do with classified documents being discovered at the president's West Palm Beach home in Mar-a-Lago. This is all connected, we understand from CBS sourcing, to payments that were made before President Trump won the White House while he was campaigning. It was alleged, and his lawyer, former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen, has admitted as much, that there was an affair between the former president as a private citizen and an adult actress, and he didn't want it published, he didn't want it publicized, and effectively paid off that actress to not speak about it. Michael Cohen says as much, and the ways in which the Donald Trump campaign for president, according to documents, allocated those funds, they were described as reimbursements for a whole slew of reasons, none of them moral. It is against the law to misrepresent how campaign funds are being used. That is likely at the center of this case in Manhattan, being brought by the district attorney. And because of the witnesses that have been called, we've seen Alan Weisselberg, who was running the Trump Organization. We've heard of Mr. Pecker, who was at the National Enquirer, a tabloid. We've heard Michael Cohen as well, his former fixer and lawyer. Effectively, it's possible that that action, that illegal action, which would have been a campaign finance violation, could be upgraded from a misdemeanor to a felony if it's connected to other crimes related to those business practices. So again, we won't have this confirmed until Tuesday. We won't know for sure, but this all centers around the activity Donald Trump performed as a private citizen while he was running for president. At that time, he was based here in Trump Tower in New York, and that's why those chickens in some ways are coming home to roost. This has nothing to do with what he did as president. Those other cases continue, Lana and Lilia, but that's why this moment is so remarkable. We are about to watch former President Trump return to New York. These will be his final moments moving before he is at Trump Tower and heading to the courthouse on Tuesday. So just really a remarkable moment we haven't really seen before.
And we are watching every aspect of that. Our viewers can see the Trump plane on the tarmac there at LaGuardia, where our Errol Barnett is also following everything for us. The ground crew in place, having just moved the stairs up to the plane. We expect to see the former president disembark at any moment. While we are doing that, we also want to bring in CBS News political director Finn Gomez. He is in West Palm Beach. Finn, obviously, being down there, you are seeing something different and hearing something different, perhaps, from what Errol referred to with that Trump supporter and what he had to say here in New York City. Tell us just about the mood there in that very red area where the former president has made his home.
Yeah, what we are seeing is a very vocal and growing amount of supporters who have gathered around Mar-a-Lago, who gathered around before the president, along the airport before the former president took off from West Palm Beach to New York. Supporters of his waving flags, singing songs, chanting signs that had pro-Trump support, very representative of his MAGA-based supporters. That 20 or 30% of the base of the Republican Party that support the former president. In most recent national polls, you see the former president, who is also a 2024 candidate, really be at the top of the heap at this stage, this early stage of the 2024 presidential cycle. And what we are seeing, what we are hearing is, from that hardcore base who support the former president, regardless of these, of the charges and the arraignment that he now faces today. And as Errol said, a very historic and unprecedented place in American politics, where we've seen a former president and current 2024 presidential aspirant being essentially surrendering himself to authorities and facing the charges that he is expected to face in a little while.
In just a few hours, yeah. So, Finn, I just kind of want to do a bit of a recap. We are looking at former President Donald Trump's private jet. It made landing. We saw a group of people descend. I am assuming the former president was there. To be honest, the shot is a little bit far away for me to completely identify.
A lot of men in suits with briefcases.
So, I mean, it could be Secret Service. The former president could be there. I'm sure we're going to see telephoto images a little bit later. So I'm not sure if I can say that he has actually stepped onto New York land or not. I believe that might have just been Secret Service. We're still waiting for him to come down. But let's talk, Finn, because you have been covering this extensively and know all the tidbits about it, about the legal strategy. We know that given that this plane has made landing, former President Donald Trump was not fighting or staying in Florida. He's going to show up. He's going to surrender. That's what's expected to happen tomorrow, for him to be booked and photographed and fingerprinted. What do you know? What do we know, at least from your reporting, about what's going to happen there? What kind of exceptions, perhaps, do we believe are going to be made, if any, given that this is an unprecedented event, a former president who's going to be arraigned? And also, just talk to us a little bit about the legal strategy as we continue to see people coming out of the plane and await for the former president to walk out.
Yeah, absolutely, Lilia. One thing I would want to add is that those who are traveling with the president, I was in Mar-a-Lago earlier today as part of the political poll covering his departure, and who I saw were some of his top senior advisors who were joining him, Chris LaCivita, Susie Wiles. Those are essentially his campaign managers, if you will. Also, Jason Miller, his senior communications advisor, and some of the other folks that advise him that are traveling with him. But to your point, while this is the first time the former President Trump is facing and will be arraigned and processed tomorrow under this criminal investigation. This is not the first time that he has been involved in cases and legal cases. In fact, he's quite has the reputation over his years in prior to politics, of being very litigious and being very involved in lawsuits against him and himself, filing lawsuits against multiple people, somewhere around the really exorbitant amount of lawsuits that he has been involved in. And one of the strategy that is really he's known for, if you will, Lilia, is attack and delay, and essentially attacking his legal opponents, if you will, and then delaying the legal process. We will see if that is in fact the strategy that is seen here as well. But he is well known for that strategy of attack and delay. We've seen him attack not only the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, who's behind this investigation, but also the judge in the case. So what you're, and by doing that also, Lilia, the other side of this is that he's inflaming and encouraging his political supporters to back him. And we have seen that. We have seen some of that evidence in the data that's been presented in national polling, where that base has come up and supported the former president and current 2024 early frontrunner, if you will.
Yes, historic indeed. In fact, the only other time that a U.S. president has ever been arrested was actually Ulysses S. Grant while in office. He was speeding in his horse-drawn carriage, but said that the policeman who arrested him was right to do so. Not getting the same reaction, though, for former President Trump, and it's definitely a different level of severity of these alleged crimes. I want to bring back in our colleague, Errol Barnett, who is there on the ground in LaGuardia, watching things develop.
At an earshot.
Within earshot, yes, of the former president's plane. He could hear those jets as they were landing. Errol, has the mood shifted now that the plane has, those doors have opened and some of the Secret Service, potentially some of the lawyers for the former president have now disembarked?
Well, certainly no horse-drawn carriages here, Lana, but as we watch these live pictures, these aerial shots of the Secret Service coming out the rear of the aircraft and some of the luggage equipment approaching, we understand that Donald Trump, it may just be moments away from walking down those steps and entering those special Secret Service vans, which are on the tarmac. We counted about half a dozen or so, fueled up and ready to bring him from here at LaGuardia to Trump Tower. And viewers should understand what we're watching here is Donald Trump getting closer and closer to having his mugshot taken. I mean, that's the bottom line. These charges that we know about will result in him entering the courtroom as any other private citizen would have to do, and he'll be booked. There will be a mugshot of Donald Trump, and he's getting much closer to that moment right now.
Yeah, we heard Michael Cohen.
The mood here is still the same.
Just on that note, Errol, we heard Michael Cohen, his former attorney, and then turned against him, saying that mugshot in particular was, according to Cohen, Trump's nightmare.
And it's something that we don't know we'll get to see, or when. If and when, that's really up to the court. We keep trying to guess around here at which point the former president is going to disembark, Errol. We keep seeing a little bit of
we'll certainly
movement.
know. Yeah, I'm watching those same pictures with you. We'll certainly know when Donald Trump is in the motorcade, because everybody will get together and move quite quickly. The wider shot showed you there's about a dozen vehicles encircling the aircraft right now. But when you make the point about this mugshot, and even some Trump supporters saying, hey, it should be printed on T-shirts, and oh man, he's going to win the next election because of this. Keep in mind that Donald Trump is already proving himself as capable of making money from all these controversies. Just a few weeks ago, while he was in Waco, Texas, which was the last time we saw this aircraft in motion for a campaign rally, Donald Trump released a song called Justice for All, performed by a group he described as the J6 Choir. The January 6th Choir, and the song was effectively a group of men singing the Star-Spangled Banner interspersed with Donald Trump saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And Donald Trump at that campaign rally told the audience that it's available on all your streaming platforms and you can download it now. So that's just one example of the president using a case against him to make money. And as I've said earlier, this campaign says that they've raised more than $4 million since this indictment was announced.
which is not
Thursday.
as much as in his last time campaigning. I mean, he used to be a lot more effective, raising tens of millions in a short amount of time. But Errol, tell us a little bit. What do you know about who's around him or who's supporting him? Perhaps who's traveling with him, besides, of course, the Secret Service and the, I'm sure, group of attorneys. We know about at least a couple who've been doing the media rounds. And what do you know about their plans ahead of tomorrow's arraignment?
Yes. No. Well, it is not clear to me who is traveling with Donald Trump at the moment, and I just feel like this is such a surreal moment because we're now. Yeah. I mean, this is probably the most famous luggage in the country right now as we watch bags come off of an aircraft. But it does speak to the enormity of the moment as we watch Donald Trump return. We haven't seen former First Lady Melania Trump appearing with Donald Trump at recent events. It's unclear if she would make this roughly 24-hour trip back to New York. And we should also note that with Donald Trump planning to meet with his legal team this evening, this is a very fast turnaround. He is being brought back.
And there, I believe we are actually, sorry, Errol, I think we're
system.
seeing the president, the former president, Donald Trump, now disembarking from the plane. Again, this is a wide shot, but that looks to be
absolutely
Donald Trump actually walking down now. Notably, there are no waves, no crowd to greet him. So a different type of scenario than the former president is accustomed to.
A more solemn one, 3:44 in the east. He has now gotten into his vehicle. And Errol, I'm sure you're going to see this motorcade pass right by or behind you on their way to Trump Tower.
And I'll just tell you this, what was noteworthy to me from watching Donald Trump exit the aircraft, and no, there are no kind of supporters there around him, there was no fist pump. His kind of trademark act when he exits his aircraft is kind of, defiantly pump his fist in the air as a champion. He seemed here just to kind of quickly get off the aircraft and head straight into that vehicle. Everyone else's luggage all being pulled together, and we will watch the former president drive out just a short space behind me as he makes his way to Trump Tower. But this is certainly a sobering moment in so many ways. I'm just looking closely at who may be exiting the aircraft as well. I have some
Must be a former
First Lady Melania Trump. But I don't want
I'm not sure that it is, though.
No, it's not.
I'm not sure that
it might be unusual if she's
be.
walking the opposite direction.
Right.
So I would hesitate from making any guesses.
Yeah.
But you're right. We're watching.
So Errol, you stay right there. Stay on top of it. We'll give you a second to report it out. Meanwhile, we're going to pop back over to Finn Gomez to get his take. I imagine, Finn, you have been watching all of this as well. Errol made a point about that trademark fist bump we saw as the former president departed from West Palm. He at least gave one wave out. Here, coming off of the plane, there were no waves. There was nothing sort of congratulatory or celebratory in his movement from the plane.
And there's no supporters because this is the tarmac of an airport, which nobody has access to. So certainly, the kind of place where he would have that kind of a rallying or campaign tone. But
what type of tone do you think the former president is going to try and strike while he is on the ground here, Finn?
Well, I think that, I think it's, the point about the raised fist pump and all that. And I think Lydia has, makes a great point that he really only has that interaction when he's at a rally or has supporters around him. We will likely see many fist pumps, if you will, tomorrow night at Mar-a-Lago when he returns back for those remarks that he's going to give. Those landing, though, I did spot some of his senior advisors, including Stephen Chung, his communications director, Margot Martin, one of his communication staff, and Chris LaSavita, who's also essentially his co-manager along with Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles is also traveling with him. But one point I also want to just make out, guys, is that as the former president is landing to face and getting ready to face the processing and the arraignment that he has to face tomorrow, there's one split screen. Our colleague Ed O'Keefe points out that is something that the White House wants, and the current
White House, yes.
Current White House is to show that as he was arriving, President Biden was in Minnesota touting his legislative accomplishments while Trump was landing in New York to face his indictment, and that is something that that just politically has been something that has resonated, I think, throughout the political world. And as we are fully into this 2024 race, even though we're still expecting others to jump into the race later this year. But I think it's important to note that there was some reporting that Ed O'Keefe and I both had that we reported today that the White House and sources close to the White House say that his political operation, which was looking at April as a potential launch date for his reelect, has now been shifted, if you will, to later this year, even as late as June or July in the summer. Why? In part because of this. In part because of this attention that the former president is getting. In part because the former president, who's leading most national polls, is also fighting and squabbling with his nearest rival, who hasn't even jumped in the race yet. That's Florida Governor DeSantis. So what you're seeing is this contrast between the former president and the current president, and it's something this current White House very much wants.
And Finn, we want to pop back over to Errol as we see the president's motorcade starting to move where he is at LaGuardia. Errol, your take.
We're watching President Trump's motorcade just make its way to the exit behind where I'm standing. Behind me, what they've done here at LaGuardia is they've now held traffic to make sure that none of the public can get through. I'm just moving myself, so you may hear some shuffling as we make our way to a place where you can see it, but this is where the journey begins.
Is this as big as it gets? I mean, just from this aerial shot, we just see a handful, 3, maybe 9 vehicles or so. What does it look like in terms of the rest of the vehicles that perhaps are being used to keep the roads clear and safe?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, at the front of this line, you're seeing NYPD vehicles. Then you see Secret Service SUVs, and that is followed by some other emergency vehicles, including an ambulance, an FDNY ambulance, just making sure that every resource is available for any former president. This is the type of security detail that is afforded to all of them. And we understand that as they make their way to New York, they're going to have to enter what we all know as the BQE, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, a very busy highway through this, the largest city in the country. I don't believe they have closed any of it yet, but we have our choppers above us at this moment, and you'll watch this footage as the president makes his way from a very busy airport through a major expressway and on his way to one of the most congested parts of the biggest city of the country in East Midtown.
And we see actually
that exit is directly behind us.
Right, there you are. I can see it's very small. That place where you're located at Marine Air Terminal, and the motorcade now passing right behind you. You and Errol, have both served time as White House correspondents. We've been in motorcades with President Trump. What's notable to me as I'm watching this is that every other time we've been in one of those, there has been a press van there with the president following his motions, and this time that's absent.
I think what's really important not to lose sight of is, of course, we're looking at something that looks very presidential because every former president has a Secret Service for their safety, but this is, at the end of the day, another citizen heading tomorrow to an arraignment to face criminal charges, and in a historic way, absolutely somebody who is a former president of the United States who was indicted. That has never happened before. So important not to lose sight of what is happening here. Somebody who is going to be in court tomorrow, photographed, fingerprinted, booked, possibly not handcuffed, but it is important that he's heading out there to surrender himself, accused, at least according to CBS News reporting, of multiple charges, including a felony for falsifying business records in the first degree. Errol Barnett is in New York. Finn Gomez is in West Palm Beach. Thank you both so much for your detailed reporting from the ground in Florida and New York.
Thanks, gentlemen. Well, President Trump, as you see, is on his way to Trump Tower on 5th.
Well, we're watching from my perspective what happened on
5th Avenue now, where he will spend the night. When his motorcade arrives, you will, of course, see it here live.
We're going to take a short break. You're streaming CBS News, always on.
We're actually in the studio, and I'm watching what happened on yesterday. The former president's plane landing and him disembarking from the plane. And the motorcade has, it could be 10 SUVs along with more security detail, an ambulance, and all that a president would need in the event of a crisis. We're going to give you more on the day that former President Donald Trump is going to be arraigned. We're going to actually air the arraignment, as much information as we can. We're going to air it live here in the studio. You'll be able to see it on our platforms, and I'm looking forward to how we are going to cover this and give you the information that you need. So stay with us. We'll be back with CBS News, picking up some of their feed, and we'll be all over the internet trying to find the best feeds that is available for us to watch this is a very historic event. This doesn't happen every single day. This is something that's happening in our lifetime. I want to see how the New York Police Department is going to manage and deal with those who are going to be in the streets protesting. There will be people protesting against the arraignment. There'll be people in the streets supporting the president. There'll be others not supporting the president. So there's a lot for us to watch. Stay there. We have more on Boston
Trump was
Black
indicted
News.
Thursday, becoming the first former president ever to face criminal charges in the United States. Trump is expected to surrender to authorities and appear in court on Tuesday. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has not released the exact charges against Trump, but according to press accounts, the grand jury indicted Trump on more than 30 counts. Bragg's case focused on hush money payments Trump made to adult film star Stormy Daniels during his 2016 presidential campaign to cover up his affair with her. The charges come 4.5 years after Trump's former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to charges of tax evasion, bank fraud, and lying to Congress about the hush money payments, which he says Trump directed him to make. Cohen served time in prison. Donald Trump is still facing 3 other major investigations. Veteran prosecutor Jack Smith is leading a Justice Department probe into Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection and attempts to overturn the 2020 election. In Georgia, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is investigating Trump's effort to overturn Biden's victory in Georgia in 2020. And in New York, Attorney General Letitia James has sued Trump and his Trump Organization for fraud related to his business dealings. On Thursday, Donald Trump responded to the indictment by releasing a long statement that read in part, quote, "This is political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history," unquote. In recent weeks, Trump has railed against prosecutors investigating him. Trump recently posted a photo of himself holding a baseball bat next to a picture of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who's Manhattan's first black DA. Trump has also referred to Bragg as an animal. This all comes as Trump is running for the White House again. Under the U.S. Constitution, Trump can remain in the race even if he's convicted. In 1920, Eugene Debs ran for president on the Socialist Party ticket while in prison. To talk more about the indictment of Trump, we're joined by Ellen Yaroshevsky, professor of law at Hofstra University Law School. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor. Why don't you begin with your response to this historic indictment?
Relieved that this matter is finally going to be in a court of law rather than just in the media, because it's so important to affirm the idea that we have a rule of law and that no one is above the law. So we'll wait and see what a jury does when they hear the facts and they apply the law.
Explain what we understand at this point. The indictment has not been unsealed. That apparently will happen on Tuesday when Trump will surrender to New York authorities, it's believed. He will have a mugshot taken. He will be fingerprinted, and he will be in court. It's expected. But explain what we understand these charges are about.
Well, we don't know for a fact, let's say, until the indictment is actually unsealed. What we expect they're about is that he falsified business records in the hush payments regarding the Stormy Daniels matter. And as a result of falsifying those payments, he actually had the intent to influence the federal election. That makes it a felony. If it were just falsifying business records, which is really clear happened because Michael Cohen has served time in prison for that, that would just be a misdemeanor. But in order to elevate it to a felony, there has to be another crime, the intent to violate another crime. And the thought here is, and it's a thought, it's not proof, that the other crime would be to influence the federal election. What's interesting about this, Amy, even though that's a untested theory, that 3 days before this happened was the Hollywood Access tape. And so the idea here would be that because the Hollywood Access tape undermined his election prospects, that he really needed to engage in this conduct to make sure that his record of falsifying payments falsifying hush money payments wouldn't be revealed.
Now, explain that further, because the hush payment to Stormy Daniels came less than 2 weeks before the election and just after that tape that was released.
Well, it didn't matter when the hush money payments were made, right? Michael Cohen talked about the checks. Trump had signed checks, and that those were the ways in which they falsified the payments because they claimed they were legal expenses. They were not legal expenses. They were payments to Stormy Daniels. So that's the way that unfolded.
And Karen McDaniels, the Playboy model, who apparently also got hush money payments, talk about the charges. Or we don't know what the charges are, but how this all relates.
Well, we don't know. But what we do know is we're looking at falsifying business records, and any of the payments that were made theoretically under, this is what Michael Cohen says, right? They said that they were legal expenses. They were not legal expenses. They were payments made to ensure that both of those women did not talk and explain what had happened. That's why that's a misdemeanor to have done that. And when we said the indictment has up to 30 counts, that means 30 different charges. For each of those payments, for each check, that could be a different charge.
And her name is Karen McDougal. Earlier this month, Trump's former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, spent several hours testifying to a state grand jury in Manhattan. He previously pleaded guilty to charges of tax evasion, bank fraud, and lying to Congress about the hush money payments, which he says Trump directed him to make.
This is not revenge, right? What this is about accountability. I don't want to see anyone, including Donald Trump, indicted, prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated, simply because I fundamentally disagree with them. This is all about accountability. He needs to be held accountable for his dirty deeds.
Talk about the significance of what he's saying.
Well, he's going to testify. His testimony is significant. Hopefully, there will be other witnesses who will testify as well. But a part of the significance is that he will be cross-examined, and his credibility will be put at issue, and that will be a significant issue before any jury. Michael Cohen's made a lot of statements. Michael Cohen spent time in prison. Michael Cohen was indicted by during the Trump administration. So all of those will be factors as the jury considers Michael Cohen's testimony.
So can you respond to those who say that they feel that Donald Trump should be indicted, but for far more serious crimes, among them, for example, inciting the insurrection, and the significance of this being put forward, and then the how strong this case is. I mean, we're talking about the credibility before a Manhattan jury. You have someone like Michael Cohen, who himself has pled guilty to perjury and who has served time in prison, being the person who testifies, along with Stormy Daniels.
Well, let me start here. Alvin Bragg is a very careful, diligent prosecutor. He's very experienced. He's been a federal prosecutor. He was a state prosecutor in the Attorney General's office, where he investigated Trump. So coming into office, he knew very well, I think, what he was up against. He would not go forward, I believe, with an indictment unless there was significant evidence from which their office believes they can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. There may be other more significant cases. Certainly the idea of an insurrection and trying to overthrow overthrow the government is a very serious charge, much more serious than this. But Alvin Bragg doesn't control that. He doesn't control the Georgia case that Fani Willis is considering. As a prosecutor, you can only take the case that's before you, take the facts that you have, and investigate those facts. So it could be that if the timing had been different, people wouldn't be questioning, why bring this case first? This is the case that Alvin Bragg has.
So let's talk about those other cases for a moment. You referred to them quickly, but what he's facing in this federal investigation in Washington, D.C., and what exactly Fani Willis may bring charges against him for, the Fulton County DA, and then in New York, the Attorney General, Tish James.
There are many, as you pointed out, Amy, these three cases. So first of all, federal charges. Department of Justice brought in a lawyer, Jack Smith, a very experienced lawyer, who is examining the factors around the insurrection, what happened during the insurrection, Donald Trump's responsibility for it, classified documents. It's an ongoing and a sweeping investigation. We don't know what's going to happen. We do know that it appears that Jack Smith has been very diligent and forthright, going after witnesses, trying to ensure that the crime fraud exception, for instance, would allow certain people to come forward and testify, including Mike Pence. And so that's going on. We don't know when or if there will be an indictment in that case. So that's one. Fani Willis had a grand jury impaneled, and the grand jury gave her a report that she's now looking at to determine whether or not Donald Trump, through his calls to Brad's Raffensperger, trying to, quote, find 11,000 votes so that they could overturn the election in Georgia. That matter went before a grand jury in Georgia, and she's making a determination as to whether or not there will be an indictment in that case. A year ago, well, December of 22, Letitia James in New York filed a massive civil fraud case. It's fraud and other financial crimes against Donald Trump and the Trump Organization regarding billions of dollars as a result of overvaluing and undervaluing many of the properties of the Trump Organization and of Donald Trump. That matter is also proceeding. So we don't have a sense time-wise of when or if any of these other cases will proceed, whether there'll be other indictments, whether the Letitia James Attorney General case will go to a jury. That's all to be determined. All we know right now is, yes, there is one indictment. That's this indictment, and it's the first time that Donald Trump or any president will face criminal charges.
And even though it's the first indictment, it doesn't necessarily mean it could lead to the first trial. Is that right? And what does it mean if he has charges brought against him in the federal, with Jack Smith, the Justice Department, in Georgia, and the state of New York? What happens then?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, certainly just because there'll be an indictment and an arraignment, which is when Donald Trump will show up and plead not guilty, presumably, and be released, there'll be a lot of motions that will be made. There'll be a timeline set up for motions. These cases do not proceed quickly. These are white-collar fraud cases. They can go on for years. So we don't know when there will or if there will ever be a trial in New York. We also don't know whether Jack Smith will ever indict Donald Trump federally. But if so, the timing will have to be worked out. Obviously, you can't stand trial in two separate cases at the same time. So the courts, the judges will have to decide upon timing. The same is true with respect to Georgia. It may be that the Georgia case could proceed, if it's indicted, earlier than the New York case.
Donald Trump held his first major rally for the 2024 presidential campaign in Waco, Texas last weekend, vowing to destroy the deep state and railing against prosecutors investigating his alleged crimes. This is what he said.
When they go after me, they're going after you. The only way to stop these arsonists is to rebuke and reject this evil persecution by sending us straight back to the White House to expel the communists and the Marxists and all of them in 2024.
Can you respond to what he's saying?
Well, he's asking for mob rule. He's asking us to undermine, this is not the first time, undermine the rule of law and not have a democracy, basically have a world in which Donald Trump is the only person whose opinion matters. We have a country and we're trying to uphold democracy here. We're trying to uphold the rule of law. And so it's significant here that Alvin Bragg has brought this case, despite the fact that Donald Trump may continue to make such statements, despite the fact that there's going to be quite a reaction, I suspect, to Donald Trump's indictment. But we've got to uphold a system where there is a rule of law.
He showed video of the violent attack on the Capitol at the Waco rally. He also, of course, had tweeted that picture holding a baseball bat next to a picture of the Manhattan DA Bragg. Right now, the police department is preparing for next week, as he has made allusions to people gathering there, calling on every police officer to be wearing uniforms. Talk about what will happen on Tuesday. I mean, do you expect a perp walk? Do you expect him to be shown with his hands behind his back handcuffed?
Donald Trump would probably like, and he's to have handcuffs. He'd like that. He'd like a perp walk. I do not believe for a second that the DA is going to do that. The DA is being very careful about this, is being very sensitive, I think, about the ways in which he's going to be arraigned. They're going to make special provisions. The police are already called at him. If you go downtown Manhattan, it looks like they're preparing for a war zone. It's very disturbing. There's no defendant, I think, we know in history who's ever a potential defendant who's ever behaved in this fashion, calling out a mob. That said, there were not that many people there. Last Tuesday, when Donald Trump announced that he was going to be indicted, he wanted many people to come and demonstrate. There were not that many people. It's unclear how many people will be there this Tuesday, assuming he shows up. But the police will be prepared. The DA's office is prepared. New York City is prepared. We're not going to succumb to mob rule. We've got to uphold the rule of law.
Let me ask you about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who said Florida will not assist in an extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue with this Soros-backed Manhattan prosecutor and his political agenda. Unpack all of this.
It's shocking. Let's just start there. Never before has a governor said, we are not going to abide by the law. Right? Governors are required, if they get an extradition warrant from a governor in another state, to make sure that person gets sent to the state. So DeSantis first has said, I am not going to uphold the law here. The other part, the horrible part that continues to feed racist and anti-Semitic violence in many places is talking about Bragg or other prosecutors as Soros prosecutors. That is just a dog whistle for anti-Semitism, and it is just feeding the ways in which this country is terribly divided.
I wanted to read for you the beginning of a piece by Chris Hedges in ScheerPost called The Donald Trump Problem, and get your response, Professor Yaroshevsky. Donald Trump, facing 4 government-run investigations, 3 criminal and 1 civil, targeting himself and his business, is not being targeted because of his crimes. Nearly every serious crime he's accused of carrying out has been committed by his political rivals. He's being targeted because he's deemed dangerous for his willingness, at least rhetorically, to reject the Washington consensus regarding neoliberal free market and free trade policies, as well as the idea that the U.S. should oversee a global empire. He has not only belittled the ruling ideology, but urged his supporters to attack the apparatus that maintains the duopoly by declaring the 2020 election illegitimate. The Donald Trump problem, Chris Hitchens writes, is the same as the Richard Nixon problem. When Nixon was forced to resign under the threat of impeachment, it wasn't for his involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity, nor was it for his illegal use of the CIA and other federal agencies to spy upon, intimidate, harass, and destroy radicals, dissidents, and activists. Nixon was brought down because he targeted other members of the ruling political and economic establishment. Once Nixon, like Trump, attacked the centers of power, the media was unleashed to expose abuses and illegalities that had previously minimized or ignored, Chris Hedges writes. Your response?
There's always political commentary of any time there is an indictment that ends up in the media. So on the right wing now, like Trump and others, are saying this is just a politics in action. This is just a political indictment. You're just trying to interfere with Trump's election possibility. So that's on the right. Chris Hedges on the left, is indicating that this is done for other political reasons. So let me just say this. There are always political consequences to an indictment from which people in the media and the blogosphere can talk about the way in which they see it. But the point here is we have a system, and we try to have a system of the rule of law, where if people are violating the law, they're violating the law. The prosecutors investigate the facts. They have discretion as to what to do. But we expect, and we expect that there will be accountability in law. There may be other consequences from which people can argue politically. For instance, Donald Trump may say, if he is convicted, if he is indicted, it will affect his election. No doubt that is true, or it should be true. It may be true. People may vote for him anyway. But there will be consequences. And similarly, as Chris Hedges argues, you can argue all day long the reasons underlying the indictment. But we're looking at cases that really are about the legal system and whether we believe in a legal system and the rule of law.
Can you compare what's happening now, this unprecedented indictment against a former president of the United States, with what happened to John Edwards, remember when he was running for president? After 9 days, he was indicted. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury deadlocked on 5 of the 6 felony counts against the former senator. The government had accused him of orchestrating nearly $1 million in payments 2 wealthy Edwards donors made to hide his pregnant mistress from the media during a critical phase of his 2008 bid for the White House.
So yes, in fact, there were acquittals there, and it's the same question here, which is, can they prove that those payments were made with an intent to influence the election? Apparently the jury decided no. But John Edwards, the case is a bit like apples and oranges, comparing John Edwards and what he's done with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a much longer history. There are many more indications here of what Donald Trump did in terms of influencing the election. And ultimately, it's going to be up to a jury to decide whether or not these payments, these falsified business records, were done with the intent to influence the election. The question is, will the jury decide the way the Edwards jury decides? We don't know. We don't know that. Certainly, the Donald Trump defense will use that in the media and elsewhere to talk about the case against Trump and why it shouldn't result in a conviction.
Finally, is there a statute of limitations here?
Well, that's an interesting question, Amy. The idea is the statute of limitation was told. That means it was stopped and additional time is added. Told means for instance, because of Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo said we're tolling a variety of things because of COVID. So that's one. And there's also a question as to tolling generically under the criminal procedure law. I assume the defense is going to raise that issue. It appears now as if that, yes, in fact, the case can go forward because the statute was tolled from 2016 onward.
Well, Ellen Yaroshevsky, we thank you so much for being with us, professor of law at Hofstra University Law School, as we will continue, of course, to cover this historic indictment throughout next week.
The love he has for me, I cannot explain. All I know is I was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see, and I know he will do for you what he's done for me. What he's done for me is so amazing. So amazing. Yeah.
Praise Radio, the voice of the church in New England. The views and opinions expressed by the following paid program are those of the program producers, and they do not reflect the views and opinion of Boston Praise Radio, its staff, or management.
Hi, this is Mike D of the UA7 Gospel Countdown, Urban America's 7 biggest current songs and more. Join us in fellowship with our broadcast on www.bostonpraiseradio.tv, Roku TV, and WBPG 102.9 FM radio. These TV and radio networks are all coming out of Boston. Radio and TV that cares about Boston and beyond. This is yours sincerely, Mike D of the UA7 Gospel Countdown. Tune in and be blessed.
This is Renee Wise, station manager for the Boston Praise Radio and TV network of 30 radio, TV, social media, and internet stations. You can broadcast on our network by just giving me